So, welcome to Medieval Kingdoms 1212, which I'm sure most of you will be aware is a full conversion mod that is in the works for Total War Attila. It's been in development for quite some time, actually. I've always been a little bit iffy on Attila's mechanics from a multiplayer perspective, personally. But considering the fact that Medieval 3 is unlikely to be upon us anytime soon, this is probably going to be as good as it gets, to be honest with you. And I figured that I'd do a couple of battles, seeing as I've been playing it a little bit recently. They won't be instead of any Reforged content, they will be in addition to it. So, probably about 2 or 3 will be released in the coming weeks, or week or so, and if they're received well, then I'll do a few more, but if not, then no big deal. They're just going to be a flash in the pan thing anyway. So, a little battle here today, and it's going to be between old rivals, because I'm going to be playing as the Kingdom of Bohemia, on a sort of river crossing map, where first of all we're going to have a bit of an open field battle, and I've deployed with my back to one of the crossings, so a bit of a two-phase army for me over here, and then my opponent over here is going to be Steelcan, who's going to be playing as the Kingdom of Hungary, so, somewhat accurate to history. These two certainly tangled a few times, so we'll go through my army first of all, and we'll start off with my front line, which is made up of 6 units of the Pavie Spearmen. It's worth saying that this battle was made with the late period units primarily in mind, so we're going to be seeing some of the strongest units from both kingdoms today. And the Pavies, I've always found them in previous builds of the game, especially back when square formation was a thing for them, that they would be almost impossible to break down. That has changed, fortunately. They're not quite as indestructible as they once were, but they still make a very good front line, obviously very good at holding the line. Big shields to help block those arrows, and just sort of turn off the UI here. Again, my camera control for Attila is a little bit more herky-jerk than the Medieval 2 mechanics, because I'm so used to Medieval 2 at this point. But obviously this should be a very good front line, purely because Hungary obviously a little bit more focused around cavalry, so it will prevent them from simply charging the front of my army, but also because they have very good line holding capabilities against any infantry that Hungary may have brought, and of course if the horse archers that Hungary will have inevitably brought try to harass the front line, these shields will come in very handy as well. Just in behind them I have a mixed skirmish force. This is the one unit of, the 2 units of archers I should say that I brought are both high period archers actually, archer sergeants, because I felt if there was one area where I was going to save money in my army it would probably be with my archers here. And they will obviously just perform the role of trying to sort of whittle down the enemy from afar, but other than that I don't really expect too much from these guys, just give me a little bit of range. Meanwhile back here, or next to them rather, I do have some Pavis crossbows Hussite variant. Now they are a late period unit, so they should be able to go toe to toe with anything Hungary has bought, and obviously crossbows in any game, any Total War game, they're going to offer you a lot of stopping power. Potentially they can help deal with, help zone out cav, not quite to the same extent that you would be likely to see in something like Third Age Reforged, but they should still be able to do some nice damage to anything they get into a good position to fire on. Then, just back here, I've got 3 units of them, one of those crossbows is going to be across the river in my sort of reserve army back across there. My primary infantry unit, however, is going to be 4 units of these mace men. Now this is what I was banking on to give me the advantage in the infantry fight. I felt that Hungary would probably have the cav advantage. However, in a melee fight I was betting on the fact that my heavily armoured Bohemian infantry should be able to do a good amount of damage in melee. Obviously the maces giving them some nice damage should be able to punch through that armour that the Hungarians will have. So obviously 4 units of mace men is a pretty significant investment. Obviously these 2 armies, I think I did end up with more men deployed, and indeed I did, because the Hungarians brought more cavalry, and of course those units are smaller. But even so, these armies are very much focused around their quality rather than their quality. Their quality rather than their quantity. If I get my words out there. We've got some very interesting pole arms here with these sort of like morning stars on long sticks. But I do have 4 units of the Hussite Halberdiers as well. So I went for all the Hussite variant units because I figured they would be sort of more culturally appropriate for the Bohemian army. And obviously they're going to be on the sort of flanks, maybe helping to try and support my cavalry. Obviously the anti-cavalry bonus that they will offer will be very important, but also the fact that Halberdiers are very strong at holding the line and in melee against other infantry, as well, as we shall see from both factions actually. Before we get into my cavalry, we'll go through the army that I've got back here across the water. Sort of a slightly washed out look actually, but again I'm not really too familiar with Attila. We've got some Pavis crossbows Hussite. I'm just running these back across the river. Obviously the battle will be starting in just a moment anyway. And then I've got 2 more units back here of the Hussite Halberdiers, obviously as just a sort of reserve regiment. And then I have 3 units of what is basically peasants, we have Hussite Flailmen, which are, you know, effectively just a peasant mob. Really, they're actually not terrible in terms of the amount of damage they can deal. They are technically a late period unit after all, but obviously they aren't quite as strong as the professional infantry which lies in front of them. So they are obviously sort of, if I get really desperate, I'll charge them across the river quickly to try and hold down the front line, or I will try and retreat back across the river to turn it into a choke point fight. But I didn't want to make it a choke point fight for Hungary right from the off, because obviously that would be very unfair considering the amount of cavalry that my opponent has brought. My cavalry is strong, but certainly not as numerous as the Hungarian cavalry on the field today. I do have some mounted crossbows, late period. I was concerned about bringing them actually, because I knew that they would suffer at range from the Hungarian horse archers, but I figured that if the cavalry got involved in a brawl, which is not too uncommon in 12-12, then hopefully I could cycle these guys around the back and start peppering them down with more crossbow fire from horseback as well as from my infantry blob. I've got 3 units of the very nice looking mounted Bohemian Knights, obviously, you know, very heavily armoured, very, very strong. Individually, actually, they probably wouldn't be all that much weaker than some of the best Hungarian cavalry as well. But obviously, you know, the numbers here are pretty much against me, so I'm going to have to use my cavalry more to contain the Hungarian cav than go on the offensive. And then back here I do have my general, which is Buslav of Svanberg, which is going to be my general. I don't know if we can see him. They're usually in the middle here. They usually have some form of unique model, but it's pretty difficult to tell here, honestly. You can often see the king from his crown. This might be him in the middle here. I don't know, but regardless, he is technically a heavy melee cavalry, so he should do a little bit better in a sustained fight, but even so, there are only so many of my horsemen. And now we shall go across to have a look at the Hungarian army, starting off with, well, we'll start off with their cavalry actually, seeing as it's where they are at their strongest. We have 3 units here of the Royal Warriors, which are horse archers, obviously. They're actually pretty decent in melee. The best horse skirmishers often tend to be pretty good in melee as well. No different here for the Hungarians. They are technically a early period unit actually. You can see here from some of the officers that they have slightly more antiquated armour next to the heavy knights we just saw, but their stats are still going to be good, and honestly with the way 12-12 is at the moment, most archer units actually have the same missile damage, so that's one of the reasons why you can save a little bit of money on these units, because while they won't be as tough in melee or at range, they will still do the same damage all around, so obviously it is still very much a work in progress. But 3 units of these heavy bow cavalrymen, it's obviously going to give them a lot of numbers, a lot of mobility, and still a lot of damage with their heavy shot. And then we get into the real meat and bones of the Hungarian cav force. We have several units here of the Hungarian Knights, which if we get nice and close to them and have a look, obviously the unit models I think are probably the best part about 12-12 AD. They have been made very, very nicely. They look fantastic, obviously. I really like the designs on these shields as well. Obviously the Bohemian ones were just as detailed, but with Bohemian sort of a Bohemian look, whereas these Hungarian ones, obviously the Hungarians have their own style. And obviously these Hungarian Knights are going to be a real nightmare for me to deal with. Lots of them here. I think he's got 4 units of them. And then he also has the King's Bodyguard, which we should be able to see the King of Hungary. Indeed, he does have his crown. There he is, brandishing his mace. And there he is with his bodyguard unit, obviously very strong. And just in behind, we also have some Servientes, which obviously, you know, 12-12 is chock full of things that I'm going to horribly mispronounce over the course of the 3 or 4 battles that I'm going to be showing in it. But they are medium melee cavalry, late period as well, and they are just going to serve to just assist in Hungary's cavalry dominance in this battle today. Meanwhile, on his infantry force, he also has 4 units of the Parvis spears, so he doesn't have quite so many Parvis as I do, but they will pretty much match 1-to-1 with one another, but I do have 6, so I should be okay with regards to the numbers. Obviously, once again, we can see that the Hungarians have got slightly different styles to them. Some of their torsos are at the moment invisible, but that is just a bug. They will come back during the course of the battle. A bug that we noticed during playing, actually. It was very strange. Then it's also happened over here, actually. We've got a couple of units here of the Parvis crossbows, once again, late period. I believe, actually, they would be slightly stronger and more expensive than my Hussite Parvis. But overall, it's much of a muchness, really. The Parvis are always going to be pretty strong. And then we have 4 units here of the late period swordsmen. Now they are pretty damn strong, but this is an area in which my macemen certainly have an advantage. Obviously the Bohemian heavy infantry, very, very strong. The macemen also should be able to crack through any armour, whereas the swordsmen are a little bit less able to do this. Meanwhile on this flank, pushing with a little bit more ferocity with a couple of units of late period Halberdiers. So, without further ado, let's begin. And sort of taking a high level approach to this battle so far, you can see that obviously I'm going to be a little bit more defensive. I really cannot afford to move forward purely because heavy cavalry, like the late period Hungarian Knights here, are so devastating in 1212. You know, they can very easily win you the entire battle all by themselves just by running right down this line. If you thought sort of Knights in Reforged were strong, the late period cavalry in 1212 AD is extremely powerful. Late period units in general can be very, very strong, so it was a little bit of a risk, honestly, to not try and take Hungary one-to-one in the cavalry fight, but I always knew it was kind of risky to do that. Hungary, obviously, historically, more well known for their cavalry, but even so, the Central European Knights were no joke either, of which Bohemia can certainly count themselves a member. See here, these Halberdiers, just sort of, again, period of manoeuvring so far, so we'll go up to ×2 speed actually, just so that we can get into the meat of this fight a little bit more quickly. Obviously this is my reserve force over here. The fact that I have a reserve force and a backup plan is obviously a nice little bonus for me. If things started to go really badly against his cavalry, I would need to try and retreat across the river and try to use the choke point to my advantage. But as it is, I was willing to try and hold the line here in the open field because I felt confident that I could crush his infantry quickly if I engaged him in a long line with my maceman. Obviously backed up with my parvis, which I'm also going to put into spear wall when the time is right. Obviously my archer sergeants are really just here to offer me a bit of a long range option, try and sort of keep his horse archers away from my lines as long as possible, but ultimately they are just here to sort of make up the numbers and do a bit of harassment on their lines. Speaking of which, we can now see that there is some range fire coming across here. The parvis shooting a volley into the retreating halberdiers. Obviously the halberds do not have a shield, so they are going to be in a little bit of bother there. Obviously crossbow bolts flying backwards and forwards, but this is going to pretty rapidly turn into a mess with regards to the cavalry fight, because Hungary obviously rightfully feeling very confident they're going to send their melee cavalry in first of all, naturally. They aren't as good as the sort of shock cavalry anyway, so they can be used as a sort of sacrificial meat shield layer, while the Hungarian Knights and the King's Bodyguard do their grisly work. Hungary do need to move forward with their infantry at the same time though, otherwise I'm going to be able to siphon off spears to help with that cav engagement. And Knights fighting against Knights, it takes a little while to chew through them, so spears can certainly get over there before the cav fight is over. Speaking of which, over here you can see that the melee cavalry is actually charging in here, presumably trying to actually slow the engagements slow my halberds from getting to this cav engagement over here. You can see that my Bohemian Knights charging in, lances clattering into armour and shields. However, I am pretty overwhelmed in this fight so far. As I'm sure is obvious, the Hungarians certainly have the advantage here as far as the cav fight goes. It can also be quite difficult to tell them apart in a close quarters fight like this, but the Hungarian armour is actually slightly different. Now you can see some melee cavalry. I'm also sending across my general to try and stem the bleeding, but it is going to be risky. It's going to be difficult for us. You can also see over here that the Hungarian horse archers getting into a position to try and shoot along the lines of my halberds, and I'm sending out to try and support my cav, but it is, it's not going well from a cav perspective for me, and I need to sort of make the infantry fight happen quickly. Otherwise, the cav is going to win this, and they're just going to charge right down my lines and destroy my army pretty much. You can see here, obviously, the Hungarian Knights pulling out their warhammers now and their maces. The Bohemian Knights taking some pretty substantial losses. I'm getting my crossbows in behind the lines at this point, though. However, I'm already starting to see some breaking. The unit of Bohemian Knights, which took the vast brunt of that charge from the Hungarian Knights, already breaking and destroyed. My crossbows trying to get some damage done, but obviously the Hungarian Knights are not surrounded, so they can easily turn around and get that engagement going. And while here, we can see as we go in, I'm not a big fan of how the battle sounds stop when you turn it down to slow motion here, but you can see the clashing of the two units of parvis, both my own and the Hungarian units up here, but obviously that is going to be a very one-to-one fight, and I'm also sending in my maceman. Very much all along the line. You can see here that the late period swordsmen are actually getting involved with my parvis spears as well. You can see that my crossbows trying to get some nice shots on the Hungarian infantry as they advance. Yeah, the unit models I think are really the standout feature of this, to be honest, because you actually see that some of the Hungarian swordsmen have got sabres as well, which is neat. Sabres and maces sort of clashing with the parvis spears. Down here you can see a couple of units of swordsmen actually trying to double up on this unit of parvis spears, but they were in formation when they got charged, so they should be able to hold even if they don't win. And the main problem for them, of course, is the fact that I'm sending forward macemen to help.
Refuses to admit defeat. Their unit has rallied.
Now here come the macemen, charging in here, because this is honestly where the Hungarian infantry is at their strongest. The halberds will be able to crack their way through the Parvi spears if I let them, so I'm going to come down here with a unit of macemen to reinforce. It's still going to be pretty dicey down here against 2 units of halberds, honestly, but the rest of my infantry line should be absolutely fine. Meanwhile, you can see over here that the horse archers sort of cycling around. You can see that my crossbow cavalry, unfortunately, it was never really able to get free of the Hungarian Knights, which meant they suffered the same fate as the Bohemian Knights that got charged. To be fair, my Bohemian Knights are actually, holding up reasonably well in a sustained fight with these Hungarian Knights, but you can see that I haven't really landed too many blows on them, whereas slowly but surely my strength is being drained. So certainly the Hungarians look like they're in the ascendancy over here on the flank, and as soon as their cavalry is free, it's going to go very poorly for me. The Hungarian horse archers also doing a lot of harassment on my Hussite Halberdiers. But it's at this point I decide to siphon off another one of my Halberdiers to start trying to wrap up the infantry line, because I can see here that the Hungarian infantry is already starting to rout, and if I can make this advantage stick, I will then be able to reform my spears, and his cavalry will not be able to recharge my lines, which will make all the difference. That is essentially what this battle is coming down to now. Can I kill his infantry faster than he can kill my cavalry? Macemen here just absolutely breaking the will of those Hungarian swords to fight, getting my macemen into the back of these 2 units of Hungarian Parvi spears now, while my own spears that were in formation, which made again a big difference. My spears were able to hold for a substantial amount of time. Unfortunately over here my halberds trying to zone out the cavalry, but they're so slow that I'm not able to sort of defend my crossbows, and that's going to allow these royal warriors to get in there, and unfortunately this is where the pain will begin. The Hungarian Knights have been utterly victorious in their cavalry engagement. I wasn't able to kill off a single unit of Hungarian cavalry in its entirety. Their crossbows are also in position doing damage to my halberds, but down here things have still gone okay for me. The infantry fight has gone in my favour, and you can see now that as the Hungarian Knights charge forward, they are having to go through a hailstorm of archer and crossbow fire, which is going to do damage to them. Even the archers with their heavy shot can do a decent amount of damage to these late period Hungarian Knights. And already you can see here that they're starting to get bottled up. I'm also starting to siphon spears off the front line, the Parvi spears trying to get over here. So you can see that this is pretty much the mosh pit over here. One of my units of Parvis thinking of wavering. The fact that my general has died is a substantial development in the fight, because that does make a big difference to the morale of my army. But you can see over here that the combination of my spears and my macemen, far too much for the Hungarian spears, and if the cavalry stays in melee for too long here, my Parvi spears will be able to do just fine. And now I'm starting to bring over my halberds, so their cavalry all charged in, but now I'm going to be able to follow them with my own halberds that are out on the flank. His infantry is also not doing ideally. These swordsmen over here are still even in combat with all of these spears. Over here actually is where he's also having a good amount of luck. His halberds slowly but surely poking their way through my Parvis and my macemen. And now you can see also that he sees the breaking and he's going to try and rear charge, and he's going to succeed with his rear charge with his Hungarian Knights. Just running right through the macemen, and they immediately shatter, as do my Parvis spears. However, up here I crushed his infantry, and this is going to leave me with a really strong point of infantry up here. And the Parvis spears are really my saving grace, and at this point I've decided, well, it's now or never. I'm going to commit my reserves. My halberds are going to come forward, my unit of crossbows that I had in reserve as well, and then I'm going to follow that up with my Hussite flailmen. My peasants, which I'm hoping will just sort of be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but here you can see the Hungarian cavalry just pulling away. A bunch of very heavily armoured knights just pulling through the line there. The swordsman, the Hungarian swordsman, now pulling away. His infantry has managed to regroup down here near the riverside. My infantry, however, is still kind of all over the place. I was trying to chase off his crossbows, but unfortunately I didn't send a unit of Parvis with my maceman, which is going to allow the Hungarian king to vanquish my macemen, which is really unfortunate actually, because my macemen would have been very useful in dealing with what's left of the Hungarian swordsman. I did actually manage to get one unit of my macemen into the Parvis crossbows, but the Parvis are no slouches in melee either, so they are going to be able to hold for long enough, certainly, for the Hungarian cavalry to get over here, which it is going to need to do because it's taken crossbow fire. It is now in close proximity with Hussite halberds and Parvis, as the Hungarians with their shields and their maces shattering my macemen, and this just really strong blob of Hungarian cavalry is going to be able to mop up the infantry I have, which ran astray, to be honest with you. I was too busy trying to get my infantry here across the river, which, to be fair, I've got my peasants, my Hussite flailmen, getting into melee, and the Halberdiers at this point are winded. They've been in melee for a long time, they've taken damage. One of them there is missing a torso. So I've got my Hussite flailmen over there, and unfortunately, really, the Hungarian swordsmen have found themselves really outclassed by the Bohemian infantry. Definitely a fight between an infantry focus and a cavalry focus here. You can see there that what's left of my army over there just being charged down by that huge blob of Hungarian Knights. Over here, just 2 units of Hussite flailmen trying to take on these halberds from the front, and they're winning. The halberds simply don't have enough men left to hold themselves together. And now over here you can see that the Hungarian swordsmen also being overwhelmed by a combination of halberdiers and macemen. This is going to allow me now to bring my macemen around here, recharge the halberdiers and vanquish what's left of his infantry. And honestly, if his cavalry doesn't hurry, I'm going to be able to sort of wall up with a bunch of halberds and parvis spears, and then there's going to be no way for him to really get through. He needs his cavalry to charge right down through here and start recharging all my stuff now. Otherwise he's going to have a really hard time. I've got a fresh unit of Hussite crossbows as well, which has just come across here, so he can't afford to linger too long on the periphery, otherwise I'm just going to be able to start shooting him. I do still have a unit of archers as well, but the archers obviously going to be doing very limited amounts of damage to these very heavily armoured armies. Here come the Hungarian Knights once again coming forward, but now they're taking crossbow fire on the approach, so again they need to keep the momentum here as these 2 units of Hungarian Knights charge right into the parvis spears. And actually, you know, you can see even against spears the amount of morale damage that the Hungarian cavalry is able to confer is very substantial. You can see there the Hungarian king right in the mix. Well, there goes my parvis spear, so you can see that that cavalry charge, even against spears, was successful. But the Hungarian cavalry is now starting to feel the effects of this atrocious conflict. They've had to go up against Bohemian Knights, they've had to charge into several units, which included spears and halberds. And now they're starting to lose their manpower. Really, it's only a couple of units have still got over 10, but the rest starting to look a little bit thin on the ground, wavering. The rest of the Hungarian infantry is just broken off, allowing all of these flailmen and these macemen to get free, although to be fair, they're the units that wouldn't do very well against cavalry. I need to stop these crossbows firing, so I'm going to commit forward a unit of parvis. Here comes another cavalry charge. You can see once again, the loss of my general has made a lot of my units lose a lot of their stomach for the fight, which has affected a lot of my units actually. The parvis which just routed, and now my halberdiers, because under normal circumstances, halberdiers would be able to do a lot of damage to these Hungarian knights in melee. Fortunately for me, however, 2 of those units of Hungarian Knights just didn't have the strength to continue. So it's really just this 1 unit of Hungarian Knights and the king himself, who's still alive. You can see him over here. But he's in there with halberdiers. He's in trouble. Meanwhile, over here, you can see that now it's down to the parvis crossbowman to try and stand and fight against the maceman. And that's going to be the end of them. They routed off, and that was it. The Hungarian king actually living to see another day. He routed off. So where is he, I wonder? Is he still stuck in there, or was he running off? Can't actually see him. He might have died, actually. But the battle ended just before it let us know. So, a pretty intense fight there between old rivals, Bohemia and Hungary. And seeing what did the damage, obviously, you know, the Hungarian cavalry was really dominant in this fight. Did a lot of damage to my knights, and then was able to charge into a lot of my infantry. But the Hungarian army was smaller, not by a huge amount to be fair. I mean, you know, a few hundred men is still significant, but there's a lot of power bound up in those cavalry units there. Those horse archers didn't actually get too many kills in the end. Again, sort of when it comes down to late period units in particular, the armour tends to sort of shield them from a lot of ranged firepower, to be fair, but the harassment was still there, and they were still charging into my crossbows, preventing them from firing as well. But clearly where I won the fight was just how dominant my infantry force was. My macemen in particular were much, much stronger than the Hungarian swordsmen on the front line. And obviously then, of course, my Hussite Halberdiers also did a good job of keeping things together. My parvis as well had more of them on the front line than the Hungarians did. My cavalry obviously didn't fare too well. Simply the the much greater numbers of the Hungarian cav simply overwhelmed them. But ultimately you can see that really the Hungarians got almost all of their kills on their cavalry. They also got some kills on their halberdiers as well, but the rest of their army did, other than their crossbows, I guess, but you can see that several of their units didn't do very well, whereas in my army you see a much more even spread. Only really the archers and the cavalry, which, looking at the armies, you wouldn't be too surprised to see the cavalry not do too well. But with regards to all my infantry, all of the kills were relatively evenly spread, with my mace men just sort of coming out on top as my most valuable units. So yeah, a sort of clash of ideologies there between infantry and cavalry, and this time actually the infantry won, which, considering how strong the late period knights are in 1212, is kind of surprising. But then again, I did sort of try to make the map as narrow as I possibly could to make that happen. I wasn't a scumbag and used the choke point of the river entirely, so I did try to make it more open as well. But if I just simply charged across the field, the Hungarian knights would have eaten me for breakfast. So yeah, that's the first fight I think I've done in 1212 for I think I did a couple of fights back when my channel first started on it, which gives you an idea of how long this has been in development. But I don't think I've posted up one of those in a long time, actually. So just something a little bit different. Again, it's not going to be released instead of any Reforge. Reforge will still be on its normal schedule. This is just a little something extra from a couple of games that we played on this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.